On the 18th of May 1973, Yuji and Hiroshi Kudo founded Hudson Soft Limited. At first, Hudson was a shop selling art, photographs and telecommunications devices and was based in Sapporo, Japan. However, in 1975 they began selling PCs before beginning to develop and sell video games in 1978. Originally written in 1980, the first Bomberman game was made to demonstrate a basic compiler called Hue Basic, which was created by Hudson. However, it was 1983, 3 years later, before the game was eventually released for Japanese computers. The same year, the game was also released for the Japanese MSX, which was a home computing platform led by Microsoft. Before the success of the Nintendo Famicom, the platform was popular with major Japanese game studios such as Konami and Hudson Soft. The game saw a release in Europe the following year on the MSX, along with a port to the ZX Spectrum. In Japan, the game was named Bakuden Otoko on covers, translating to Bombman. However, the game used the word Bomberman for the menu titles. Strangely, the game was entitled Eric and the Floaters for its Western release, leading to speculation that Bomberman's real name is Eric Bomberman. Some of the aspects of Bomberman are said to be inspired by a game called Warp and Warp, which was made by Namco in 1981. In certain parts of the game, the character must kill aliens with time-delayed bombs, showing a lot of similarity to placing bombs in Bomberman. In this Bomberman, you play as an explorer who progresses through stages by placing bombs to destroy balloon-like floating creatures. You lose a life if you are touched by one, or are blown up by your own bomb. It was also possible to destroy some of the bricks, with each level containing an exit gate hidden under a random brick, allowing for instant progression to the next stage. To complete the game, you needed to progress through all 50 stages. The art style of the game included basic graphics, mainly due to the computing restraints at the time. It also lacked any multiplayer features or background music. Noticeably, the protagonist in the game has a very different character model from the iconic Bomberman robot which appears in future games. While Shinichi Nakamoto is often the person credited as the original creator of the game credits two programmers, Y Tanaka and T Sasagawa. After the release of the original game, Hudson released 3D Bomberman in 1984. The game was again developed for the MSX, however this time was only released in Japan. Unlike the first game, 3D Bomberman was played from a first-person perspective, with a basic corner map showing your location. The gameplay played out similar to the original game, with the same main character, enemies and goals. However, the game was criticised for being confusing and difficult to navigate. Notably, the death screen featured a close-up of one of the balloons with the flashing words, "You are dead." In 1984, Hudson became Nintendo's first third-party software vendor for the Famicom. Hudson released the game Lode Runner the same year, going on to sell over 1.2 million units. A year after becoming a software vendor, Hudson Soft decided to release Bomberman for the Famicom, which was also known as the Nintendo Entertainment System. While the game was released in 1985 in Japan, it would be 1989 before the game was seen in the West. Although never confirmed, the game was rumoured to be ported by Shinichi Nakamoto in a 72-hour marathon programming session. Returning to the original top-down 2D perspective, the game was the first in the series to include the iconic character model of the white robot, which would become the mascot for the series in future games. The sprite from the Bomberman came from a sprite of the already ported Lode Runner, also ported by Nakamoto. While the rumoured short development time could explain why the sprite was borrowed from the game is somewhat also a prequel to Lode Runner. In the game's ending, it is revealed that the robot controlled by the player turns into Lode Runner character on reaching the surface. On the Japanese end screen, words appear saying, "Congratulations, Bomberman becomes runner, see you again in Lode Runner." However, the text was removed in the Western release to be replaced with, "Maybe you can recognise him in another Hudson Soft game." As before, the aim of the game was to complete 50 stages. In the story, the Bomberman is attempting to escape a labyrinth to reach the surface world, where it is rumoured he would be granted his wish to become human. One major feature added to this game was power-ups. Each stage contained a hidden power-up which was found under one of the bricks. Notable items included the fire ability, which increased the range of bombs. There was also the bomb, which allowed players to place an extra bomb at the same time, and the skates, which increased the Bomberman's movement speed. The game included a huge graphical upgrade over the original games to make more use of the NES hardware. It also included background music, which was composed by Jun Chikuma. Chikuma would go on to compose music for many other Bomberman games in the future. Vertical level scrolling was also added, allowing for larger stages, and multiple enemy types were present in the game. As with Lode Runner, the game was a success and went on to sell over 1 million copies in its lifetime. In 1989, the NES version was ported back to the MSX. This port was renamed to Bomberman Special, and included all of the new features added in the NES version, although with slightly dumbed down graphics. Although not directly a Bomberman game, in 1987 Hudson Soft released Bomber King in Japan. Made for the MSX and the NES, it involved similar gameplay elements to Bomberman. The game was later released in the US and Europe in 1988 and 1989 as Robo Warrior. In July of 1987, Hudson began developing their own hardware. This hardware was created in collaboration with the Nippon Electric Company. The console would end up being called the PC Engine in Japan and the TurboGrafx 16 in the US and Europe. Games for this console were distributed on a ROM cartridge called a Hue card. The first Bomberman game to be released for the PC Engine was the game Bomberman, released in 1990. The game was also released in Europe as Dynablaster for the Amiga, MS-DOS and Atari ST between 1991 and 1992. While the game was also advertised for the Commodore 64, it was never released to the public. The game was a greatly expanded reimagining of the first game, including improved graphics to the previous versions and introducing themes for stages. The game included 8 worlds, with each world divided into 8 stages, with the final stage of each world being a boss battle. Black Bomberman was also added as the main antagonist. In the game, the Black Bomberman is on a mission to control the world and has kidnapped the daughter of Dr. Mii Mori, the genius inventor and creator of Bomberman. Bomberman for the TurboGrafx 16 was also the first Bomberman game to include multiplayer. Allowing for up to 5 players to play against each other, the game played similar to the single-player game. However, power-ups were limited to bombs and fire. There was also an alternative mode called Skull Mode, which made detrimental skull power-ups appear beneath blocks. The multiplayer mode will become one of the biggest selling points of the Bomberman series, with some feature games being only made for multiplayer gameplay. A limited version of this game was also distributed entitled Bomberman Users Battle. The game appeared to be a slightly modified version of the game and only included multiplayer. The game is likely to be released through Hudson Soft Fan Club to commemorate the release of the game. It is rumoured to have had no more than 1,000 units produced, making it a very rare cartridge. The first handheld Bomberman game to be released was Bomber Boy for the Game Boy. The game was released in Japan in 1990 and was also released in the US and Europe in 1991. However, in the US the game was named Atomic Punk, and in Europe the game was named Dynablaster. 3 game modes were provided in this game. Game A was an updated version to the core Bomberman game, which included panel power-ups, which are gained in each level and can be bought from a store. A currency was introduced to the game named GP, which was collected by destroying blocks and completing levels quickly. Game B is the same as the NES Bomberman game, however a square map is used instead of the rectangular one found on the NES version. Finally, Versus mode used the link cable to play 2-player multiplayer in 2 different game modes. While there are many more games that we need to go through, that's all we have time for today. But if you'd like to see the rest of the history of Bomberman and more game history, please subscribe and like this episode to make sure we know that you want more. Also remember to follow me on Twitter @HumpFair. Please leave a comment down below if you would like any specific game series to be covered. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time on Game History.